From the outside looking in, my life with Emma looked picture perfect, the kind of marriage people envy from afar. I was the calm, level-headed businessman who believed deeply in loyalty and trust, while Emma thrived in the social scene, effortlessly drawing attention with her grace and charm. Our kids, Sophie and Daniel, were off on holiday with my parents, giving us a rare window of time alone together. It seemed like the perfect chance for us to reconnect as husband and wife, or so I thought. When Emma suggested we take a vacation, I was caught off guard, but it sounded like a good idea. "It'll be good for us," she said, flashing that brilliant smile of hers. "Just the two of us, time to relax, unwind, and maybe find our way back to each other." Her words sounded genuine enough, but I couldn't help but catch that faint edge of impatience in her voice, like she expected me to agree without hesitation. And I did. Why wouldn't I? Trusting Emma had always come naturally to me, it was just who I was. Besides, she had a point. We deserved this. She eagerly took over the planning, insisting she knew exactly what would make this trip special. "I'll handle everything," she told me, waving her perfectly manicured hand like it was already settled. I didn't argue. Emma had a way of taking charge and making it feel like she was doing me a favor. Honestly, I was relieved to have one less thing to think about, especially with the constant demands of running a business. The weeks leading up to the trip blurred by, her excitement filled every conversation while I quietly looked forward to getting away. She spent countless hours researching resorts, booking spa treatments, and shopping for new outfits. I just nodded along, letting her energy pull us forward. I kept telling myself that this was her way of showing effort, of proving she still cared about us. But as the departure date crept closer, I couldn't shake this nagging feeling deep down. Nothing concrete. Just, something didn't sit right. Her excitement felt a little too polished, her insistence on handling every detail unusually firm. Still, I pushed those thoughts aside. Doubting Emma felt like betrayal in itself, and I wasn't the type to question my wife. When the day finally arrived, I watched her pack with the kind of smooth efficiency that only comes from experience. "You sure you've got everything?" I asked, half joking. "Looks like you've packed for a month." She laughed it off, brushing past my comment. "You know me, always prepared." And with that, we headed for the airport. I told myself to relax, maybe this was exactly what we needed, time away from all the noise of daily life. I looked over at Emma, radiant, composed, beautiful, and I remembered why I fell so hard for her all those years ago. The flight was easy enough. Emma spent most of it scrolling through her phone, occasionally glancing my way with a distracted smile. I didn't mind. I was content to sit quietly, letting my mind drift to thoughts of peaceful beaches and quiet days ahead. For once, I allowed myself to believe that everything really was as perfect as it seemed. When we finally arrived at the resort, Emma's face lit up with excitement. "Isn't this incredible?" she gushed, gesturing toward the grand entrance and the breathtaking ocean view beyond. I nodded, genuinely impressed. It was far more luxurious than anything I would have picked myself, but I didn't mind splurging if it made Emma happy. As we checked in, she leaned into me, her voice low and full of promise. "This is going to be amazing, Ryan. Just you wait." Her words felt comforting, and I let my earlier doubts slip away. For the first time in a while, I felt hopeful. Whatever rough patches we'd faced, this vacation felt like a fresh start, a step in the right direction. What I didn't realize then, was that this perfect beginning was nothing but a fragile illusion, a carefully crafted lie that was about to break apart in ways I never saw coming. The resort was absolutely stunning, the kind of place you'd see splashed across the pages of some glossy travel magazine. The lobby alone was breathtaking, with its polished marble floors gleaming under the soft lights and massive glass windows framing a perfect view of the turquoise ocean beyond. Holding the welcome drink they'd handed me, I let myself pause for a moment, taking it all in. Maybe Emma had been right after all. Maybe this trip really could be the fresh start we needed. That's when I saw them. "Ryan, look who's here!" Emma exclaimed, her voice full of excitement as she waved enthusiastically. 3 women, Claire, Vanessa, and Melissa, made their way toward us, their designer sunglasses perched perfectly atop flawlessly styled hair. They moved with a kind of loud, effortless energy that filled the space like a crashing wave, all high-pitched laughter and exaggerated greetings. I blinked, caught off guard. This was supposed to be a romantic getaway, just the two of us. Emma hadn't breathed a word about anyone else coming along. Claire reached us first, pulling Emma into a tight, familiar hug. "Em, you look incredible. I can't believe we're finally doing this, this place is amazing." Melissa chimed in next, her eyes scanning the lavish surroundings. "Leave it to Emma to pick the absolute best." I stood there feeling like an outsider, slowly realizing this whole thing had been pre-arranged, without my knowledge. Emma turned toward me, her smile bright and polished. "Ryan, you remember Claire? And Vanessa?" And Melissa, of course? I nodded politely, vaguely recalling them from some of the social events Emma had dragged me to over the years. Isn't this great? Emma added, slipping her arm through mine. We can all relax together, it's going to be so much fun. Fun. That was one way to describe it. The group made their way over to a plush seating area in the lobby where drinks and appetizers were already waiting, clearly organized ahead of time. I followed behind, still processing the fact that this wasn't a trip for two after all. As the women settled in, their laughter echoed through the space. Emma was in her element, right in the center of attention, effortlessly steering the conversation. I tried to chime in here and there, but every time I did, it was either politely brushed aside or somehow redirected back to Emma. Then the little jab started. Ryan, you're so lucky Emma handles everything, Vanessa said with a sly smile. I don't know how you'd manage without her. Seriously, Claire added, swirling her drink. Emma's the real powerhouse, keeping the household running, staying on top of everything, and still finding time for you. They all laughed, and I forced a tight smile, hiding the sting beneath my calm exterior. Emma didn't defend me. If anything, she leaned into their narrative, casually boasting about her social connections and accomplishments like I was barely a footnote in her life. Well, someone has to keep things running, she said, raising her glass. Ryan's got his business, sure, but I'm the glue that holds everything together. They cheered at her words, raising their glasses in a mock toast. I sipped my drink in silence, wondering how the hell I'd ended up here, a guest at my own vacation. As the evening dragged on, the conversation turned to luxury vacations, designer brands, and social events I couldn't care less about. Every so often, Emma would glance my way, her smile tinged with amusement, and something else I couldn't quite put my finger on. Was it satisfaction? At one point, Melissa leaned in, her voice low but just loud enough for me to hear. You're so lucky, Em. Most guys wouldn't fund a trip like this. My grip tightened around my glass. Of course I'd agreed to pay for the trip, that wasn't the issue. But hearing it framed like that, as though I was nothing more than a bank account, didn't sit right with me. Emma laughed softly, brushing the comment off like it was nothing. Well, Ryan understands the importance of treating me right, don't you, darling? I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. Of course. But something inside me shifted. This wasn't a couple's getaway, this was Emma's show, and I was nothing more than a background prop. When the group finally dispersed for the night, I felt more isolated than ever. Emma, seemingly oblivious, was deep in conversation with Claire as we made our way to the front desk to check in. Her trip. Those words hit harder than I expected. I stood there in the hallway, just outside the slightly ajar door, their voices clear as crystal. They weren't even whispering. They weren't worried about me overhearing because, in their minds, I didn't matter. I wasn't a husband. I wasn't a partner. I was a wallet. An accessory. A fool. Clara's voice chimed in again, dripping with amusement. Honestly, Liv, I don't know how you put up with him. He looks like a lost puppy half the time. So, docile. Laughter followed. Emma's laughter. And that was the moment everything inside me crystallized into something cold and sharp. They thought I wouldn't react. They thought I wouldn't notice. They thought I wouldn't do anything. For years I'd let things slide. I'd ignored the condescension, the subtle digs, the controlling little ways she made decisions without me. I'd chalked it up to her personality, forceful, driven, socially hungry. But this? This wasn't a power play. This was theft. This was humiliation. And it was intentional. I stepped back from the door, not out of weakness, but because I knew myself well enough to realize, if I walked in there now, I'd say things I couldn't take back. Things I didn't need to say. No. That wasn't my style. Olivia had staged her little vacation theater, cast herself as the star, surrounded herself with sycophants, and relegated me to a background character. But what she didn't realize was that I controlled the stage lights. And I was done playing the fool. Walking back to my room, the wheels in my mind turned with chilling precision. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger burns out fast. No. What I felt now was colder, more dangerous. Resolve. Back in my suite, I sat at the small writing desk, pulled out my phone, and began reviewing my credit card app. Every charge. Every detail. Room reservations, spa appointments, dinner bookings, all conveniently pre-authorized, all set up in advance by Olivia. Paid for by me. I could have gone down to the front desk right then and cancelled everything. But no. That would be messy, dramatic, exactly what they'd expect a sulking man to do. Instead, I booked myself a different room, at another resort entirely. One twice as luxurious. Private villa. Ocean view. Full privacy. And paid for it with a different card, one Olivia didn't even know existed. Tomorrow morning, while Olivia and her entourage were sipping overpriced mimosas and basking in their own self-congratulations, I'd quietly check out. Leave them to their vacation. Let them explain to the hotel why the card on file no longer worked. Let them scramble. I smiled to myself, a rare, sharp smile that hadn't surfaced in years. She thought I wouldn't notice. She thought I wouldn't act. But that was Olivia's greatest mistake. She had forgotten one very simple rule. Never underestimate a quiet man. Especially not a quiet man who's done being used. The representative on the other end of the line was annoyingly cheerful. Yes, Mr. Bennett. How can I assist you today? Cancel all cards associated with my account, I said, my tone as steady as it had been all day. Certainly, Mr. Bennett. Is there a particular reason for the cancellation? Fraudulent activity, she asked, her voice a little too bright, too eager. I paused for a moment, just to savor the weight of it, before responding. Yes. Fraudulent activity. The irony wasn't lost on me. Please cancel them immediately. Of course, Mr. Bennett. I'll take care of that for you right now. I could hear her typing away in the background. All cards will be cancelled, and you'll receive new ones in the mail within the next few days. Is there anything else I can assist you with? No, that will be all. I ended the call, the finality of it sinking in. Olivia's access to my finances was severed, her ability to freely spend on a whim, gone. This was no longer about love or betrayal. This was about control. My control. A simple, unremarkable phone call, yet it felt monumental. I sat in the silence of my office for a few more minutes, my mind coldly calculating the next move. Olivia had crossed a line, but I wasn't going to make the mistake of reacting impulsively. No, I was going to ensure this was a lesson she would never forget. A slow smile tugged at the corner of my lips as I stared at the screen in front of me. This wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was the beginning of something else entirely. I was going to rebuild everything, my power, my autonomy, my financial security, and Olivia would have nothing to show for the games she'd played. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings and decisions. The house was quiet, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the weight of my decisions fully. There would be no turning back now. When the new credit cards arrived, I kept them to myself. Olivia would never know. The next step was simpler, documenting everything. I gathered records of her spending, kept track of the money I'd lost on her whims, and catalogued every detail, from the luxury vacations to the extravagant gifts she'd taken for granted. I was building a case, but more than that, I was slowly removing myself from the life I once shared with her. Every action I took from that moment forward would be deliberate, methodical. Later that week, I arranged the meeting with my lawyer. The papers would be drawn up quickly, and then I would serve her with the reality of it all. A clean break, no drama, but a severance so complete it would shake her to her core. I wasn't going to drag this out with accusations or bitterness. Instead, I would leave her with a mirror, one that reflected the hollow truth of everything she had done. I knew how this would play out. Olivia would try to fight back, to manipulate the situation, but I had already outmaneuvered her. She had underestimated me for the last time. The clock was ticking, and every moment that passed, I felt more and more at peace with my decision. This was the price she had to pay for turning me into a fool. A price that would come in the form of everything she thought she controlled, slipping through her fingers, one calculated step at a time. By the time I checked my phone again, there was another flurry of notifications. Olivia's name popped up over and over, each message more frantic than the last. I had to admit, I took a strange pleasure in the growing desperation in her texts, the small cracks in her carefully curated world. It felt almost poetic. Every little thing she took for granted, the dinners, the shopping, the luxury treatment, was slipping out of her hands like sand. She had spent years believing that she could walk all over me, that I would always be the one bending and adjusting. But this was different. The moment I walked away from that resort, I took back control, and Olivia would soon feel the full weight of that decision. I didn't respond to her messages immediately. Instead, I focused on the bigger picture, what would come next. I had already begun freezing the assets, but I needed to ensure everything was in place for the divorce. The more distance I put between myself and the chaos of the resort, the more I could see clearly. Olivia's reckless spending was only the beginning of the consequences she would face. I wasn't angry anymore. The anger had subsided, replaced by a calm that felt almost soothing in its clarity. Olivia had shown me who she truly was, and now, it was my turn to show her what happens when that trust is shattered. Every move I made, every decision I took, was calculated. It wasn't about vengeance, it was about balance. By noon, the messages from Olivia had stopped. But the calls didn't. The hotel was now calling directly, demanding immediate payment for the failed transactions. I could feel her panic from across the phone line, even though I hadn't said a word yet. Mr. Bennett, the voice on the other end began, we've tried to contact the cardholder regarding the outstanding balance on the rooms. I'm afraid we need to settle this matter now, or we may have to take further action. I could hear the nervousness in the receptionist's voice. She had no idea who she was speaking to, or why her call was being so unceremoniously ignored by the person she was trying to reach. I didn't rush to resolve it. Let Olivia experience the consequences of her actions. I hung up without saying a word and let her marinate in the mess she had created. The next step was a logical one, ensuring that all her options for maneuvering would be exhausted. I double-checked the lock on every account she had access to, reviewing them with a meticulous eye. The feeling of control wasn't something I had truly experienced in years. I realized, not for the first time, how much I had allowed Olivia to pull the strings. She had made me believe that I was the one in charge when in reality, I had been merely a pawn in her game of manipulation. Now, I was in charge. By mid-afternoon, Olivia finally tried calling me. This time, I answered. "David, we need to talk," she said, her voice clipped, trying to maintain composure. "No, Olivia," I responded, my tone even, almost bored. "We don't need to talk. You've made your bed, and now it's time to lie in it." I could hear the catch in her breath. The realization that I was no longer playing by her rules was setting in. "What the hell do you mean by that? You can't just leave me like this." "Yes, I can. You're about to learn that," I replied, my voice steady. "Your spending spree is over. I've cancelled every card. The house is staying with me. And the divorce papers are being drafted as we speak. You won't be able to use my name or my accounts anymore, Olivia. Your game is finished." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I knew she was processing the weight of what I had just told her. Finally, she spoke, her voice tinged with something I hadn't heard in a long time, fear. "David, you can't be serious. You're just being dramatic." "No, Olivia. You've crossed the line. I'm done." I hung up before she could say anything else. My fingers tingled with the adrenaline of it, but more than anything, I felt relief. She had pushed me too far, and I was finally in control of my life again. Later that evening, Olivia tried again, calling multiple times, leaving voicemails, each more frantic than the last. I ignored them all, letting the silence speak louder than any words she could muster. By the time I finally decided to return her call the following day, I was ready for her to try and manipulate me again. But I had made it clear. The balance had shifted. Olivia's world, once so carefully constructed around her whims, was crumbling under its own weight. The next few days were a blur of finalizing the divorce papers, preparing for what would come next, and ensuring that Olivia didn't have a way to worm her way back into my life. I'd given her enough chances to make things right, but now it was time for me to move on. As I sat in my office, watching the final steps of my separation from her unfold, I knew I was going to be fine. The quiet certainty in my chest, the sense of purpose, was all I needed to realize that this was the right path. Olivia would eventually come to regret everything, how she manipulated me, how she thought she could control me. The situation had reached its boiling point, and Olivia was running out of ways to control the narrative. The hotel staff, clearly growing frustrated with the failed payments, started to give her less patience. Their politeness had turned into a form of passive-aggressive professionalism that Olivia could no longer brush aside. Her usual charm, the facade of control she wore like armor, was cracking before everyone's eyes. Back at home, I let the phone buzz relentlessly. Olivia's calls became more frantic, her voice increasingly shrill with each unanswered ring. She was used to being in charge, used to having everything go her way, but I had pulled the rug out from under her. For the first time in years, I felt the power shift, and it felt liberating. The irony was not lost on me. For so long, I had been the one who bent over backwards, trying to make her happy, to keep things together, to make sure she had everything she wanted. But in the end, it was all for nothing. She took and took, without ever once considering the toll it was taking on me. Now, she would feel the weight of her actions. I knew she would eventually reach out, but I wasn't going to make it easy for her. Each failed attempt to use the cards, each moment of panic, was a small victory in my eyes. I could picture her, frantic, scrambling for a way out. She was realizing too late that the game had changed, and I wasn't going to play by her rules anymore. The calls kept coming. Some were filled with frantic pleas, others with anger, but I wasn't swayed. I was done. It wasn't until the next day that I received the call I had been expecting. Olivia, her voice now strained with desperation, finally broke through. "David, please, you need to fix this," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "I don't know what's happening, but I need you to put things back the way they were." "Olivia," I said, my voice calm, controlled. "I told you last night. I'm done. This isn't a mistake, and I'm not going to fix anything. I've been covering for you long enough. She was silent for a long moment. The air between us seemed to hang heavy, thick with everything left unsaid. "You don't understand," she finally whispered, her voice softer now, almost pleading. "I was trying to get some freedom, to have a little fun. I never meant for things to get out of hand." "Out of hand?" I repeated, the words cutting through the silence like a blade. "Olivia, this has been out of hand for a long time. I wasn't a fool, but I let myself be treated like one because I thought you'd change. But you won't. You just keep taking, and I keep giving. And now, I'm done." There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing, but no words came. Finally, she spoke again, her voice small and weak. "I never thought you'd do this. I thought you'd always just forgive me. You always did." "Not this time," I said, the finality in my tone settling like a weight between us. "This time, I'm taking back what's mine. All of it." I ended the call before she could say another word. There was no point in listening to her excuses. I had heard enough. The Olivia I had married, the woman I thought I knew, had disappeared long ago, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. And now it was time for me to rebuild. The resort had been a grand spectacle, a way for Olivia to indulge in the life she felt entitled to. But to me, it was nothing more than a symbol of everything that had gone wrong between us. The false luxury, the constant pretense, it all paled in comparison to the clarity I now had. I had put up with enough, and I wasn't about to let her manipulate me into thinking I still owed her anything. Not anymore. Olivia would have to face the consequences of her actions. She was used to being in control, but the tables had turned. She would no longer be able to live her life on my dime, and she would have to learn how to navigate the mess she had created on her own. The storm had already begun, and it was only a matter of time before she realized just how much damage she had caused. The tension in the air was thick with the weight of consequences. Olivia's once invincible confidence had shattered, revealing the hollow core of her entitlement and manipulation. Her friends, once eager to bask in her self-proclaimed glory, now stood in judgment, their disappointment clear. They'd seen the cracks in her facade and weren't sure if they could ever look at her the same way again. Back home, I had no intention of calling her. The lines of communication between us had already been severed. The divorce papers had been filed, and Olivia was going to learn, in the most painful way, that the financial safety net she had relied on was no longer there. As far as I was concerned, this was no longer about us, it was about me taking back control over my life, my finances, and my dignity. The calls continued to flood in, but each one went unanswered. The text messages came in rapid succession, growing more desperate, more pleading. But I had no empathy left. The damage had been done, and it was time for her to face the fallout of her own actions. Olivia had always been good at convincing herself that she was the one in control, the one calling the shots. But now, she had been reduced to a mess of accusations and excuses. I imagined her, standing in the lobby of the resort, holding the divorce papers in one hand, trying to maintain some semblance of composure, while the reality of her situation unfolded in real time. The resort staff, with their polite yet firm demands, weren't the only ones demanding accountability. Her friends, once her unwavering allies, were beginning to turn against her. It was only a matter of time before Olivia realized that her life was no longer a game to me. She had underestimated me, miscalculated her power, and it was going to cost her everything. As the days went on, I felt an almost detached satisfaction. She had shown me her true colors, and now, I was going to show her what happens when you try to use someone as a stepping stone to your own self-serving goals. The calls came to an abrupt halt. Perhaps she had finally realized that I wasn't going to be her safety net anymore. The resort's final demand had been the last straw. And when I received that last call, the one from Karen at the resort, I knew it was the final chapter in this sad tale of betrayal. When Karen said they were hoping to resolve this amicably, I couldn't help but smile bitterly. Amicably? The only thing left for Olivia to resolve was the mess she had created, and I wasn't going to make it easy for her. I was done being the one who cleaned up her chaos. By the time I hung up, I felt no remorse. She had made her bed, and now she would lie in it. If Olivia was used to controlling the narrative, she had just learned a painful lesson. I was no longer willing to play by her rules. Back at the resort, Olivia was left scrambling for answers. Her friends, once loyal to her, were now questioning everything. Fiona and Clara had been caught in the crossfire, and while they might have been angry with Olivia, they also found themselves questioning their own loyalty. The idea that she was the breadwinner had been nothing more than a lie. Everything had been funded by me. I didn't care how Olivia tried to spin her situation. The resort staff wasn't interested in her excuses. The bills hadn't been paid, and the consequences were too severe to ignore. The resort had gone from offering her luxury to demanding payment. And when the passports were held hostage as collateral, I knew the full weight of her reality was finally crashing down on her. Olivia's final act of desperation, calling her brother for help, was the last piece of her humiliation. Her brother's reluctant loan only added insult to injury, the lecture from him ringing in her ears. I could only imagine how she must have felt in that moment, completely exposed and stripped of the power she once thought she held over me. Every call, every text, every plea for help had gone unanswered. She had nothing left. The days that followed were a blur of routine and quiet determination. I had made the decision to keep the transition for Lily and Ethan as smooth as possible, but the weight of the changes still hung in the air. Every small gesture, helping with homework, picking them up from school, settling in for a movie night, became a gentle reminder of what I was rebuilding, and how much it mattered to keep things normal for them. I had expected the silence of the house after Olivia left to be a hollow, painful thing, but instead, it was oddly peaceful. No more passive-aggressive remarks, no more tension thick in the air. The house felt like it could breathe again. It was strange to be free, but it was also terrifying. The space Olivia had once filled had now become an emptiness that both scared and freed me. As the days passed, I began to feel a sense of purpose again, something I hadn't felt in a long time. The emotional burden that Olivia had placed on me had lifted, and in its place, there was a quiet resolve to move forward, no matter what. I spent my days working, getting through the motions of daily life while making sure Lily and Ethan were adjusting well. They still had questions, of course, and their little faces reflected the confusion that comes with such a huge change. But I didn't want them to feel like they were the cause of it. I wanted them to know, despite everything, that they were the most important things in my life. The calls from Olivia stopped eventually, and I found a twisted kind of relief in that. Her desperate attempts at re-establishing some semblance of control over me were gone. But then one day, a letter arrived for me. It was from the law firm Rebecca worked for. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. Olivia had likely initiated the legal battle for a more favorable divorce settlement. My lawyer had already prepared me for the possibility. She'd probably challenge the house, our assets, and everything in between. I didn't care. I was no longer interested in playing her games. The letter sat on my desk for a while before I opened it. Rebecca's note was professional and precise. Olivia was asking for joint custody of the kids, and she was pushing for a portion of the house's value. A part of me wasn't surprised. Olivia had always been about appearances, always trying to hold on to anything that made her look successful, that made her seem in control. But I had already made up my mind. The house would remain with me. The kids would stay with me. I made a mental note to call Rebecca the next day and discuss our next steps. In the meantime, I didn't want to let the chaos of the divorce affect my children any more than it already had. They needed stability. And no matter what happened, I was determined to give that to them. Lily and Ethan seemed to be adjusting. They missed their mom, of course, but they understood, in their own way, that things were different now. They spent weekends with Olivia, but the visits were increasingly strained. Olivia hadn't been the same since the divorce. She was trying to maintain the image she had carefully crafted, but the cracks in her facade were too wide to hide now. It wasn't just the financial fallout, it was the emotional disarray. The friends she once relied on had scattered, and her own family seemed more distant than ever. Olivia had lost everything she'd taken for granted, and it wasn't long before I began hearing stories about her trying to rebuild some semblance of her life. It was clear she was struggling. In some twisted way, I almost felt bad for her. But I couldn't afford to care anymore. She had shown me who she really was, and I had learned my lesson. As for me, I was moving on. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. The road ahead wasn't going to be without challenges, but for the first time in years, I felt like I had control over my own life again. I was no longer tethered to the manipulative games Olivia had played. I wasn't going to let her dictate my happiness any longer. And as I sat down one evening with Lily and Ethan for another movie night, the weight of it all settled in a different way. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was beginning to thrive, even if it was in small, quiet steps. And in that, I found something unexpected: peace. She snapped one evening, her voice laced with disdain. I've spent years building my image, my life. I can't just throw that away now to work in some office or retail shop. Jacob had already heard this excuse too many times. He was at his wit's end. Olivia, he said, his tone edged with frustration, you're going to have to face reality. No one's going to come and rescue you. You can't live off of your old reputation forever. She had no answer. Only a sullen silence that filled the room like a weight she couldn't escape. Olivia had always been the one in control, at least in her own eyes. But now, without the security of my wealth, without the circle of friends she had once so easily manipulated, she was adrift, unsure of where to turn. She had spent so many years accustomed to a lavish lifestyle and to using others to sustain it, never once considering what would happen when the facade crumbled. Meanwhile, I kept my distance, not out of cruelty but out of necessity. I couldn't afford to be drawn back into her chaos. The first few months after the separation had been a whirlwind of settling into a new rhythm with the kids. They had their moments of uncertainty, of course, but they were resilient, and we were building something stronger. It was clear Olivia hadn't found her footing. I would occasionally hear updates from Jacob or mutual acquaintances. Olivia's attempts to reignite old connections were met with cold shoulders and polite dismissals. Her charm, once a tool of manipulation, had lost its shine. Her calls to me were few and far between, mostly related to the logistics of the divorce, but they were always tinted with a subtle desperation. She wasn't just struggling with the dissolution of our marriage, she was battling the dissolution of her identity. One evening, after a long day with the kids, I received a call from Jacob. This time, his voice was different. There was a mix of frustration and something else, guilt, maybe. David, I don't know what to do anymore. Olivia's barely holding it together. She's trying to get back with you, but not in a way that I think you're willing to accept. She won't listen to anyone but you, I felt a strange emptiness at his words. Olivia had always been able to make herself the center of attention, the person everyone gravitated toward. Yet now, it seemed, she was spiraling without me to prop her up. Tell her it's over, I said, my voice steady but firm. She needs to understand this is the life she's created. There's no going back. I'm not the one she can turn to anymore, Jacob. She needs to face this on her own. There was a pause, and then Jacob sighed. I'll tell her, David. But I don't think she's ready for that. She's lost, and you know how she is when she doesn't get what she wants. I did know. Olivia had never been one to accept defeat gracefully. I thought of the woman I had once married, the confident, charming, manipulative force who could bend any situation to her will. She was nothing like that now. She was broken, and in her desperation, she was clawing for anything that could restore her sense of control. But that control wasn't mine to give anymore. I had made peace with that. The idea of going back to her, of giving in to her demands, was something I couldn't stomach. Not after everything. Not after the years of emotional drain, the manipulation, the lies. Days turned into weeks, and I focused on rebuilding what had been torn apart. The kids and I had forged a new life together, one that was quieter but filled with the kind of peace I hadn't known in years. I still thought of Olivia, of course, but only in passing, like a distant memory of someone who had once played a pivotal role in my life. I realized, though, that no matter how much time passed, Olivia was never going to change. She would always seek out those who could provide her with the life she craved, and when she didn't get it, she would blame everyone else. It was a pattern she'd established long before our marriage had ended. And as I sat with Lily and Ethan, watching them grow and thrive in this new chapter, I realized something. I wasn't just moving on, I was becoming the man I had always been beneath the surface. The man who could withstand the weight of emotional chaos and still come out stronger on the other side. The man who wasn't defined by the people around him, but by the choices he made. Olivia had wanted me to be her anchor, but she hadn't realized that anchors, no matter how solid, can be dragged into the depths. And once you're pulled under, there's no escaping the pull of the current. But I had escaped. I had found freedom, and in that freedom, I had found my own strength. And that, in the end, was all I needed. I took a seat at a small table by the window, the quiet hum of the cafe offering a calm contrast to the tension that swirled in my chest. I wasn't sure what Olivia's apology meant anymore, or what I was supposed to do with it. I'd moved on, and yet the thought of seeing her again stirred something deep within me, an old ache, maybe, or just curiosity. When she walked in, it was hard not to notice how different she looked. There was no hint of the polished, perfect image she once maintained. Her hair was messier than usual, and her clothes, though still stylish, seemed to hang on her with less confidence than they once did. She spotted me immediately and gave a small, hesitant wave before walking over. "David," she said softly, taking a seat across from me. She looked tired, worn. The sharp edges I'd become so familiar with seemed dulled, replaced by something else, vulnerability, maybe. "Thank you for meeting me." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "What do you want to talk about, Olivia?" She took a deep breath, her fingers tapping nervously on the edge of her coffee cup. "I owe you more than just an apology, David. I've spent months thinking about everything, the way I treated you, the way I treated this whole relationship. I don't even know where to begin." I watched her closely, still guarded. I had no idea where this conversation was going, but I wasn't going to let her off the hook so easily. "I'm listening," I said, my voice calm. She looked down for a moment, gathering her thoughts, before looking back up at me. "I took you for granted. I always assumed you'd be there, no matter what. I thought I could control everything, our life, our marriage, even you. But when it all fell apart, I had to face the truth. I'm the one who ruined it. I couldn't help but notice the rawness in her voice, the crack that had never been there before. I had heard apologies from Olivia before, but this felt different. It wasn't the rehearsed words I was used to, the ones that always seemed to come with an underlying manipulation. This time, there was genuine remorse, even if it was too little, too late. Why now? I asked quietly. After everything, why the change? She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, looking away. I've been alone, David. Really alone. It's not just about losing you, it's about losing everything. My friends, my status, my control. I built my whole life on things that didn't matter, and now I'm left with nothing. I listened, but I wasn't sure how to feel. Part of me felt sympathy for her, but another part was still angry about the years of manipulation, the constant emotional weight she had placed on me. It's too late for me to fix this, isn't it? She asked, her voice small. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed you to know I see it now. I see everything I did wrong. I met her gaze, my heart a mix of emotions. I'd spent so many years justifying her actions, making excuses for her, but I wasn't that person anymore. No, Olivia, I said, my voice steady but firm. You can't fix it. You had your chance to change, and you chose not to. I'm not going back to that. Her face fell, the weight of my words hitting her harder than I expected. I understand, she whispered, barely audible. I wanted to say it, so you could hear it from me. I exhaled slowly, feeling the finality of the moment settle in. I had listened, I had heard her out, but that didn't mean I had to accept her apology or the life she was trying to paint with it. I'd moved on, and I wasn't going to go back to someone who could never fully value what I had given. I think that's all I need, Olivia, I said softly. I appreciate you being honest. But this is where it ends. For both of us. She nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. For a brief moment, I felt something, pity, perhaps, but I quickly pushed it aside. Olivia's journey was hers to face. I wasn't responsible for fixing her anymore. I'll leave you to it, then, she said, standing up. She hesitated for a moment, then reached out to touch my arm. Goodbye, David. Goodbye, Olivia, I replied, watching her walk away. I didn't feel the sense of relief I thought I might, but I felt something else, peace. As I sat back down, I realized that this final moment with her had closed a chapter that I hadn't realized was still lingering. The past was gone. The future was mine, and I could finally move forward without her shadow hanging over me. The next few weeks were quiet. Olivia's attempts to reach out grew less frequent, her messages more curt. I kept my distance, focusing on my work, my family, and the life I was rebuilding. And though I couldn't change what had happened, I was beginning to realize that I didn't need to. What I had now, what I had with Lily and Ethan, was everything I needed. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. The days that followed that conversation with Olivia felt like a turning point. While I didn't expect her apology to heal everything, it marked the beginning of a much-needed separation between the past and the future. Olivia's words had cut through the years of pain, and for the first time, I saw her not as the manipulative, self-serving woman I'd known, but as someone struggling with the consequences of her actions. As for me, I had spent so much time thinking about the wrongs she had done that I had forgotten how important it was to acknowledge the rights, the things I had gotten right, the things I could still control. The kids were doing well, and I was making sure they didn't feel the weight of our past. I focused on providing stability, making sure they knew their lives could still be filled with laughter and love despite the changes. When Emily entered the picture, I was surprised by how easy it was to be myself around her. There was no pretense, no expectations beyond what was real between us. She appreciated me for who I was, not for the things I had achieved or could offer. There was something refreshing about that, something I hadn't experienced in a long time. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun set, the weight of everything that had transpired between Olivia and me seemed to fade. The quiet moment with Emily was a reminder of how much I had been yearning for peace, for simplicity, for connection that wasn't clouded by manipulation or hidden agendas. You've come a long way, Emily said softly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. You've worked hard to get to where you are. I smiled, a sense of satisfaction and relief washing over me. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. I needed to rebuild my life, who I was before, not just for myself, but for my kids. And now, it feels like I'm finally living my life, not someone else's version of it. I can see that, she said, turning to face me with a warmth in her eyes. You deserve to be happy, David. You've earned it. The weight of those words stayed with me long after the night ended. They reinforced something I had been avoiding for so long. I had been worthy of happiness all along. I didn't need to beg for it or wait for it to be handed to me. I had the power to create it. As I woke up each morning, the quiet of the house was no longer oppressive. It was peaceful. Lily and Ethan filled the space with their voices, their joy. Their laughter was the melody of this new chapter, the proof that life had, indeed, gone on. They were growing, adjusting to this new normal with resilience I could only admire. In many ways, they were healing me just as much as I was healing them. When Olivia reached out to check on them, I made space for it. She was trying, in her own way. It wasn't perfect, and it didn't erase the past, but I couldn't deny that there was a shift in her. I could see the effort, even if it wasn't enough to restore the trust we had once shared. I had no illusions about her, no fantasy that we would somehow find our way back together. But the wounds, while still tender, were beginning to close. Her efforts to connect with the kids weren't for me to judge, but for them to decide. I made sure they knew that they had the right to love her, even if they knew, as I did, that some relationships couldn't be repaired. And for me, that was enough. I had learned that I couldn't fix everything. What I could do was focus on the present. Focus on the family I had, the one that was whole in its own right. I wasn't a victim of my past anymore, I was its survivor, and now I was looking forward, not back. In time, I found myself trusting again, slowly, carefully, but surely. Emily was a part of that healing, as was the life I was building with my children. I no longer needed Olivia's approval or validation. I had found it in myself, in my role as a father, and in my newfound freedom to live life on my terms. The path to this peace hadn't been quick or easy, but it had been worth every step. As I looked ahead, I knew the road would continue to unfold, full of unknowns, but for the first time in a long time, I was ready for whatever came next. As I watched Lily and Ethan run around the yard, their laughter filling the air, I felt the weight of everything that had happened begin to lift. Emily stood beside me, her presence a constant source of comfort, and I realized just how far I had come. The man I was now, someone who understood his worth, who was present for his children, who had rediscovered joy, was far from the person I had been when Olivia and I first met. Our journey together, as a family and as individuals, had been a complicated one. But with each passing day, it became clearer that the pain and loss had not defined me. They had shaped me, yes, but they hadn't broken me. Instead, they had given me the space to rebuild and reevaluate what truly mattered. Emily's question about what's next had lingered in my mind. In the past, I might have thought about the future in terms of success, wealth, or achieving certain milestones. But now, it was about being present in the moment, creating a life that was fulfilling and rooted in authenticity. I had already begun living it, every day, through the connection I had with my children and the quiet joy I shared with Emily. The contrast between my life now and the chaos of the years I had spent with Olivia couldn't have been starker. Olivia, in her own way, was trying to rebuild too, but it wasn't for me to fix or control. It was her journey, and I had to trust that she would navigate it as best as she could. I had made my peace with what had happened. Our marriage had taught me valuable lessons about love, trust, and boundaries, lessons that were still echoing through my relationship with Emily. I had learned how to set boundaries that honored who I was, to not be defined by someone else's expectations. Emily never asked me to be anything I wasn't, and that in itself was revolutionary. She allowed me the space to rediscover who I was without pressuring me to be more, or less, than I was. It was the kind of love that was steady, rooted in respect, and that gave me the confidence to explore parts of myself I had long neglected. As the months passed, I continued to focus on creating a life that was fulfilling, not just for me, but for Lily and Ethan too. Emily's encouragement to pursue hobbies I had long abandoned was a reminder of the man I used to be before the weight of a failed marriage had burdened me. Photography, hiking, cooking, small joys that now had room to breathe again. One Sunday, Emily and I went on a hiking trip. The air was crisp, the path winding through the woods, and we walked side by side, talking about everything and nothing. It felt good to just be, without the heavy expectations of the past weighing me down. We stopped at a clearing, the view stretching out in front of us, and I realized in that moment that this was what it meant to truly live. As we sat down on a rock, Emily turned to me with a soft smile. "What's next for you, David?" she asked again, this time in a way that felt more like a reminder of how far I had come. "I think I'm already living it," I said. "I've got everything I need right here. I'm building something real, something that's just mine." Emily nodded, her hand resting lightly on mine. "You deserve this," she said simply, and I believed her. For the first time in a long time, I was truly at peace with myself, with my life, and with my future. Olivia's journey, like my own, was still unfolding, and I would continue to support my children in their relationship with her, even if things had changed between us. The focus, though, was no longer on what had been lost, but on what I had now. The quiet joy of family, the steady support of a partner, the laughter of my children echoing around the house, it was more than I could have ever hoped for after everything I'd been through. The years had taught me that nothing was ever truly permanent. Life ebbed and flowed, shifting with every new challenge and triumph. But what remained constant, what had become my foundation, was love, the love I had for my children, the love I was learning to give myself, and the love Emily had brought into my life. As I watched the sunset that evening, with Emily by my side and the kids playing happily in the yard, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude wash over me. The road had been long, filled with moments of doubt and heartbreak. But it had led me to this place, a place where peace, love, and the promise of a new beginning filled the spaces I had once thought were empty. This was my new beginning. And it was everything I needed it to be.